You are probably doing something incredibly routine right now. Maybe you are scrolling through your phone with a thumb that moves with subconscious precision, or perhaps you are tying your shoes, looping the laces together in a knot you've tied 10,000 times before. You don't have to think about it. The physics of the knot and the muscle memory of your fingers are perfectly synced. But here is the paradox that should probably keep you awake tonight. You have absolutely no idea who taught you how to do that. You can't remember the moment your fingers finally clicked with the logic of a shoelace. You don't remember the room you were in, the color of the carpet, or the specific tone of voice your parent used to encourage you. In fact, you don't remember anything from the first 3 to 4 years of your life. That version of you, the one who learned to walk, talk, and navigate the entire physical world, is a complete stranger to you. It is as if the first chapter of your biography was written in disappearing ink, leaving you with the skills but none of the stories. We call this infantile amnesia, and for a long time, we thought it was just because babies weren't switched on yet. We were wrong. It is a common myth that your early memories are gone because your infant brain was simply too simple to record them. Many people, including some very famous psychologists who really should have known better, once argued that babies are essentially blank slates or vividly conscious but incapable of storage. Which, if you've ever seen a toddler figure out how to open a child-proof cabinet, you know is a massive understatement of their cognitive power. Sigmund Freud famously suggested that we repressed these early memories because they were too traumatic or filled with primitive desires. That was the prevailing theory for decades, but modern neuroscience has essentially taken that idea and tossed it into the bin. The reality is much more fascinating and, frankly, a lot more mechanical. Your brain wasn't being lazy, and it wasn't trying to protect you from the trauma of being a toddler. It was actually working too hard. The very process that allowed you to learn at the fastest rate you will ever experience is the exact same process that wiped your hard drive. You didn't forget your childhood because you were small. You forgot it because you were growing at a speed that was physically incompatible with long-term storage. To understand why your brain would betray you like this, we have to look at the indexer of the human mind, the hippocampus. If your brain is a massive library filled with millions of books, the hippocampus is the librarian who decides where each book goes and creates the catalog so you can find them later. In an adult brain, this system is a well-oiled machine. Most of the time, anyway, unless you're trying to remember where you put your car keys. But in a baby, the librarian hasn't finished training yet. Specifically, a part of the hippocampus called the dentate gyrus is still under heavy construction during your first few years. Researchers have found that while babies are excellent at implicit memory, the kind that lets them recognize their mother's face or learn that a hot stove hurts, they struggle with explicit or autobiographical memory. This is the "I was there and this happened" kind of memory. Because the dentate gyrus isn't fully wired up, it can't create the complex index needed to link a specific event to a specific time and place. It's like trying to save a high-definition video file onto a floppy disk from 1995. The hardware simply isn't ready for that kind of data. This brings us to the first real wow moment of this mystery, the neurogenesis paradox. For a long time, we thought the reason we couldn't remember being a baby was that our brains were still developing new cells. We assumed that once the cells were all there, the memories would start sticking. But in 2014, two researchers named Paul Franklin and Sheena Jocelyn at the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto flipped this idea on its head. They conducted a study using mice, which have very similar memory structures to humans, and found that it wasn't a lack of new neurons that caused the amnesia, it was the excess of them. When you are a baby, your brain is producing new neurons at a staggering, almost violent rate. This is called neurogenesis. These brand new cells are constantly pushing their way into the existing circuits of the hippocampus, trying to find a place to plug in. Think of it like a massive, high-speed construction project happening in the middle of a busy city. As these new neurons integrate themselves, they disrupt the existing connections. They literally pull apart the wires that were holding your earliest memories together. In the rush to build a more powerful, adult brain, your body accidentally bulldozed the memories you had already started to form. This discovery was a massive shift in how we think about the infant mind. It means that you actually did have memories when you were 2 years old. You probably remembered what you had for lunch, the name of your favorite toy, and the way the sun felt on your face in the park. But because your brain was so focused on expanding its territory and adding new bandwidth, those memories were overwritten. It's a trade-off that nature made on your behalf. You sacrificed your personal history in exchange for a massive increase in learning capacity. You were essentially a supercomputer that was formatting its own hard drive every 6 months to make room for a better operating system. Which, let's be honest, is a pretty fair deal considering how much you had to learn in those first few years. But this raises an even stranger question. If the brain eventually stabilizes, why don't the memories start sticking immediately? Why do most of us still have a dark zone that lasts until we are 4 or even 5 years old? The answer might lie in the language scaffold. There is a very famous researcher named Robin Fivish at Emory University who has spent decades studying how we form our life stories. Her research suggests that memory isn't just about brain cells, it's about the tools we use to organize our thoughts. And the most powerful tool we have is language. Before you have a solid grasp of grammar and vocabulary, your memories are sensory and fragmented. You might have a feeling of a certain room or a specific smell that makes you feel safe, but you don't have a narrative. You can't say, "Yesterday I went to the zoo and saw a giraffe." Without those linguistic hooks, your brain has nowhere to hang the details of an experience. It's like trying to organize a massive collection of photos without being able to use folders or tags. Once you start learning how to tell stories, usually around age 3 or 4, your brain begins to structure its experiences into a chronological timeline. You start to become the narrator of your own life. And once that narrator shows up, the memories finally start to stay put. But here is where it gets even more complicated. Your culture actually changes how early you can remember things. In a fascinating series of studies, researchers compared the earliest memories of adults from different parts of the world. They found that, on average, people from Western cultures, like the US or Europe, have earlier memories than people from East Asian cultures, like China or Korea. Which, parenthetically, seems like a very strange thing for biology to allow. The reason isn't biological, it's social. In many Western cultures, parents tend to engage in elaborative reminiscing. They talk to their toddlers a lot about the past. "Remember when we went to Grandma's house? What did you eat? Was it yummy?" This constant practice of talking about the past acts like a training program for the child's hippocampus. It teaches the brain that these past events are important and should be saved. In cultures where there is less emphasis on individual narrative and more on the present moment or group harmony, the start date for memory tends to be 6 months to a year later. Your first memory isn't just a product of your brain. It's a product of the conversations you had before you could even properly speak. However, we need to address a very uncomfortable possibility. Those early memories you do have, there is a very high chance they are complete fabrications. This is one of the most unsettling findings in modern psychology, spearheaded by Elizabeth Loftus at the University of California, Irvine. Loftus has shown through decades of research that human memory is not a video recording. It is a reconstruction. Every time you remember something, you are actually rebuilding that memory from scratch using bits and pieces of information you have stored. It's more like a Wikipedia page that anyone can edit than a locked file. For your earliest memories, your brain often takes stories your parents told you, or photos you saw in an old album, and weaves them into a first-person experience. You remember blowing out the candles on your 3rd birthday not because you actually remember the event, but because you've seen the photo so many times that your brain eventually decided to build a fake memory around it. In one famous study, researchers were able to implant a totally false memory of being lost in a shopping mall into the minds of adult participants just by suggesting it happened. By the end of the study, the participants were describing the mall and the person who found them in vivid detail. They weren't lying. Their brains had genuinely constructed a past that never existed. So, where does that leave us? We have this massive gap in our lives, a 3-year hole where our self was supposed to be. If the memories are gone, and the ones we have left might be fake, does that mean those first 3 years didn't matter? Actually, the opposite is true. This is the implicit ghost theory. Just because you can't explicitly recall a memory doesn't mean it isn't still living inside you. There is a different kind of memory system called implicit memory that doesn't rely on the hippocampus or language. This is the system that stores your emotional reactions and your fundamental vibe as a person. Believe it or not, this is why you might have an irrational fear of dogs or a deep, unexplained comfort when you hear a specific type of music. If you were held and comforted every time you cried as a baby, your implicit memory stored a rule that the world is a safe place. You don't remember the hugs, but you carry the security they provided in your very nervous system. Conversely, if those early years were chaotic or cold, your brain calibrated itself to be on high alert. You might be an anxious adult today because of something that happened to you when you were 18 months old, something you will never, ever be able to remember. This is the true weight of infantile amnesia. Your conscious self is like the top floor of a skyscraper. You can walk around, look out the windows, and describe what you see. But the first 3 years of your life are the foundation and the basement. You can't see them, you can't go down there, and you have no idea what the structural beams look like. But if those beams are crooked, the whole building leans. You are a biological accumulation of thousands of experiences that you are legally and neurologically barred from ever revisiting. You are, in a very real sense, a stranger to the person who made you who you are. The baby version of you was the most important teacher you ever had, and yet, you've forgotten their face, their voice, and their thoughts. You are a sequel that has completely lost the original movie. Let's take a look at a specific case study that highlights just how weird this lost time can be. Consider the case of patient HM, one of the most famous figures in the history of brain science. As a side note, his real name was Henry Molaison, and he essentially gave his life to science. Henry had his hippocampus removed to treat severe epilepsy. For the rest of his life, he couldn't form a single new, explicit memory. If you met him, walked out of the room, and came back 5 minutes later, he would have no idea who you were. However, researchers found something mind-blowing. He could still learn new physical skills. They asked him to trace a star while looking at his hand in a mirror, a very difficult task. Every day he did it, he got better and faster. But every day, he claimed he had never seen the task before in his life. His body remembered, but his mind was blank. This is exactly what happens to us during our first 3 years. We are all patient HM for the first chapter of our lives. We are learning how to exist, how to love, and how to survive, but the narrator isn't there to write it down. Our bodies are doing the work while our conscious minds are still in the waiting room. Why did nature do this? Why create a creature that is so profoundly shaped by experiences it can't recall? Some evolutionary biologists argue that it's a security feature. If we remembered the sheer frustration of being a baby, the inability to move where we want, the struggle to communicate basic needs, the constant vulnerability, it might be too much for our developing egos to handle. Which, if you've ever spent 10 minutes with a screaming toddler, sounds like a very plausible theory. By wiping the slate clean, the brain allows us to start our conscious lives with a sense of agency, unburdened by the memory of our own total helplessness. It gives us a fresh start. We wake up at age 4 with a fully formed personality, a set of skills, and a self that feels like it has always been there, even though it's actually a very recent arrival. But this fresh start comes at a cost. It means that we can never truly understand our own origins. We spend our adult lives trying to find ourselves, going to therapy, or looking at old photos to try and figure out why we act the way we do. We are searching for clues in a crime scene where the evidence has been systematically destroyed by our own biology. We are the only animals on Earth that write biographies, and yet we are all missing the most important part of the book. And while we can use science to explain the how, the neurogenesis, the hippocampus development, the language scaffolding, the why still feels a little bit like a cosmic joke. You were there. You felt it. You lived it. And you are the only person on the planet who is forbidden from knowing what it was like. There is a study from Memorial University of Newfoundland, led by Dr. Carol Peterson, that suggests the amnesia might be even more fluid than we think. She found that when you asked children about their earliest memories, they can often remember things from when they were 2 years old, which is much earlier than adults can remember. But when you go back and ask those same children a few years later, those early memories have vanished, replaced by newer ones. It's like a receding tide. The memory window stays about 3 years wide, and as the child gets older, the back edge of that window keeps moving forward, swallowing the earliest years as it goes. This suggests that the amnesia isn't a wall we hit, it's a slow, creeping fog that eventually covers everything from our infancy. We are constantly losing the start of our lives, even as we are living it. Think about that for a second. The you that existed when you were 2 years old is still in there somewhere, buried under layers of new neurons and linguistic labels. That child's eyes are the ones you are looking through right now, even if you don't recognize the view. You are the survivor of a total memory wipe that happens to every single human being, a universal amnesia that we all just agree to ignore. We walk around as adults, confident in our identities and our histories, while ignoring the fact that the foundations of our characters were laid in a period of time that is, for all intents and purposes, a total blackout. You are a ghost haunting your own biology, living in a house where the first floor has been permanently sealed off. The most counterintuitive part of all of this is that the disappearance of your memories might actually be the highest form of memory. In computer science, there is a concept called overfitting. If a program remembers every single detail of every single piece of data it's given, it becomes useless. It can't generalize. It can't apply old lessons to new situations because it's too focused on the specific details of the past. To be smart, a system has to forget the noise and keep the signal. That is what your infant brain did. It forgot the color of your nursery walls and the specific taste of your first jar of baby food so that it could keep the concept of a wall and the concept of food. It stripped away the specifics to build the universal. Your amnesia isn't a failure of your brain. It's a sign that your brain was working perfectly. It was turning data into intelligence. You lost the memories, but you gained the world. But that doesn't make it any less haunting when you really sit with it. Every time you see a toddler crying in a stroller or laughing at a bubble, you are looking at a version of a human being who is experiencing the world with a vividness and intensity that you can no longer even imagine. And you know, with absolute scientific certainty, that in 20 years, that person will have no record of that moment. They will be just like you, convinced that their life really started when they were 4, blissfully unaware of the thousands of hours of joy and terror that actually built them. We are all walking around with a secret history that we can never tell, a story with no beginning and a self that is built on a foundation of forgotten moments. Think back to the ordinary thing you were doing when this started: scrolling, walking, breathing. You are doing those things because a small, nameless version of you spent years failing at them until they finally worked. That version of you is gone now, deleted by the very growth it worked so hard to achieve. It's a strange kind of sacrifice, isn't it? One version of you had to die so that the current you could live. You didn't just grow up, you replaced yourself. And while that might be a bit uncomfortable to think about, it's also the only reason you're here to think about it at all. If you find this kind of biological rabbit hole as fascinating and slightly terrifying, as I do, then sticking around for more of these deep dives might be for you. We're all just trying to figure out how this weird machine in our heads works, one forgotten memory at a time. Because here is the cold, final reality. As you sit there right now, your brain is already starting to prune away the details of this very moment. In 10 years, you might remember that you watched a video about memory, but you won't remember the temperature of the room or the exact way the light was hitting your screen. Your brain is a forgetting machine, relentlessly editing your life to make it fit into a narrative you can handle. You like to think of yourself as a continuous story, a single person moving through time from birth to death. But science tells a different story. You are a collection of selves that are constantly being overwritten, and the you from the first 3 years of your life is already completely dead. You are currently inhabiting the remains of a person you will never meet, carrying out the instructions of a ghost who didn't even have the words to tell you who they were. Your existence is built on a void, and no matter how hard you try to remember, the person who taught you how to be human is gone forever. You didn't just lose your memories, you lost your origin. and there is absolutely nothing you can do to get it back.